Merry meet, Annie here. Welcome back to Tarot Together. Continuing our series on the symbols on the High Priestess card. We've talked about meeting the first female and the color blue that surrounds her, that she's wearing even. Let's look at her body language. She seems young, doesn't she? Like the magician, she doesn't seem to be seasoned yet. She's not a crone or a sage. She's young. She's sitting very still, and she's looking straight ahead. Perhaps right at us, but most definitely not to the left or the right. And that's important in tarot language because left and right are symbols for the past or the future. So looking straight ahead in the tarot often means being in the moment, being very present to the here and now. She looks very serene and very calm while she's making no effort to reach out to us. To me, she looks very approachable. How does she look to you? A.E. Thierens, in the General Book of the Tarot, refers to that quietness of her as the quiescence of the goddess, the passive richness of the universe awaiting him that will be able to see it and appreciate it. So if she looks very still, and might look because she's sitting so erectly and regally that she's unapproachable, could it be because we're not ready to see it and appreciate it and approach her? Because look at her face. Again, decide for yourself how approachable she looks to me. She looks like if I stepped up to her, she would lift her eyes and look right at me. Wait refers to the High Priestess as sitting in an attitude of waiting. Is she waiting for us? We see her left hand. Her right hand is hidden. In tarot, the right hand is the projective hand, the hand that makes manifest. The left hand is the hand which receives, the opened hand, the hand of welcome. That also influences, in tarot symbology, how approachable we might find her. So take a look at her again before we move on. Do you see that she's sitting in an attitude of waiting? Can you sense, well, what are the possibilities then? If I step up to her, if I open myself up to her, will she look up and make eye contact with me? Let's take a look at her headdress. Referred to often by many tarot authors as the headdress of Isis. In early appearances, the headdress of Isis was a throne, literally a throne on her head, because she was considered the throne. I sometimes think of that when I look at this card, because while she's certainly not wearing the headdress that has a throne on it, look how she sits, very much as if she were the throne. In her later history, Isis took on aspects of Hathor. Her headdress then became a combination of the cow's horns and the lunar disk, the horn and the moon crown of Hathor, the Egyptian goddess of love and fertility, and of Isis, the Egyptian all-mother. When the horns were broadened, here in the symbology on the High Priestess card, the symbol expanded to the concept of the moon, the waxing and the waning moons, the three stages of the feminine divine, Virgin Mother and crone, and that within all of us. Oh, it doesn't leave you gentlemen out, because you too have phases of virgin, father, and sage, and you can relate to those aspects represented here within the concept of Isis, the All-Mother. But it is a connection for the High Priestess card as an alignment to Goddess, as virgin, whole within herself, complete within herself. It connects her to the lessons of Isis about spiritual enlightenment that is inner illumination. That headdress, with its 3 symbols of the moon, represent the entire expanse of life and all the cycles of life. The power of the moon as changeable yet predictable. The very nature of life, the ebb and flow that is predictable, that will happen. And the entire expanse of all of those cycles equaling the length of our life. Interestingly, when we mention the attitude of the High Priestess as she sits calmly, looking straight ahead, being very present to the here and now, that upon her head, close to her third eye and her greatest wisdom, are symbols not of the here and now, but of the past and the present and the future and the coming and going and the shadings and the turnings and the tides of our entire life, not just this moment. What a wonderful paradox she represents. Virgin, present in the here and now. And yet with this crown of wisdom which understands that is only a brief and shining moment in the length of a life, in the length of our lives. Let's take a look at her gown. Oh, and refer back to all the information, all the wonderful correspondences and traditional associations of that color blue, because her gown is very blue. But also, consider some other things about it. It totally covers her. There is very little that is visible. Her face in that one receptive, gentle hand. It shows that she expresses herself only in an intellectual and emotional domain. The color of blue literally enshrouding her in a gentle way, keeping everything inside. It's setting herself separate. She is setting herself separate. She's not performing like the magician. She's not on show. Everything that's happening here is happening within her. No action externally. We might look at that perhaps as, well then, is she too withdrawn? What's there to learn from her if she's shrouded and hidden within these cloths? One of the lessons of the symbols on this card is her placement between the black and white pillars, and we'll talk about them when it comes to their symbols. But it leads us to consider that she's balanced between 2 things. Very aware of them both. Her shroud of blue isn't separating her. It is instead providing a place within which she journeys and explores. That's the place where she will reach out, but only after consideration and coming to understand the proper time for any action. Look at the hem of her gown. Maybe one of my top 10 favorite things on all the imagery and all the cards. Her gown turns into water and then flows away from her. It's said by tarot historians that this is the source of all the water in all of the tarot cards in the future that it shows up in. It definitely flows from this card to the Empress card. We can track it, quite literally, in the imagery. But it's a stream of consciousness that flows continually throughout the cards. And it has come from the hem of the gown of the High Priestess. Is she really sitting there then so firmly, as it may first appear in her kind of rigid posture, sitting so still? If we look at that water streaming from the hem of her gown, she's actually in continual motion. Remember, I asked you to consider, in the introduction to the symbols for the High Priestess card, motion or not motion when it comes to a card. She sits there so stilly, and yet she is continually in motion. For me, there's a very distinct connection between the power of the openness of her crown, that crown of Isis, that part of her which understands that even as the Virgin, even as Isis in that virgin stage, or Mary, or any of us in the stage of being whole unto ourselves, even while that's happening, that crown indicates she understands she is. Everything is so much more than that. She's connected to all time through her crown, representing the wisdom of past and present and future. It opens her up to possibility, opens her up, to my mind, to the blue that is the sky above her. And at the same time, there's the connection below of her gown becoming water into the world. While the magician reached for heaven and earth, remember, one hand up and one hand down? To me, the High Priestess feels like she is heaven and earth. She's the channel and the conduit, but at the same time she is so connected that she is both. She doesn't stand separated from them. Oh, there's power in the magician because he understands he's connected and he can make something happen from it. But she seems to just sit and be with it and be it. It feels like with absolutely no effort, she draws down the moon. And in fact, this card is seen as the representation of the drawing down of the moon. What comes to her, what enters her, what flows down through her, and literally, in the imagery, flows from her. She is the moon. And before we move on from her clothing, look at the robe that covers her gown. Waite referred to it as a shimmering radiance. He gives us a hint there. This is not something that lays heavy upon her. And the strokes that Pixie used and the way that she drew it allow us to feel it as flowing and light, suggesting light itself, the gentle touch of blue. And let's not forget the power of flow, the flowing into water, moon to water, and water into the world. A shimmering radiance, described Waite. I look forward to your comments below, as always, with additional thoughts you might have on any of the things I've mentioned in this video. And of course, welcome your sharing on the Tarot Together group. Mary Part.